Daniel Rivera sat at the back of room 214, heart pounding as the teacher handed out the math exams. He already knew the result before the paper reached his desk. A giant red 43% stared back at him, circled twice like a wound. Around him whispers rose. A couple of students chuckled, trying to hide their amusement but failing. Someone behind him muttered, "Damn, even my dog could have passed that." Daniel didn't turn around. He stared at the floor, feeling a cold weight settle in his chest. The worst part wasn't the grade. It was the look on Ms. Delaney's face, the same look she gave kids who didn't try. She shook her head slightly as she moved past his desk, disappointed but Daniel had studied, he'd tried, but math just didn't stick in his mind like it did for the others. Numbers blurred, formulas vanished, and the pressure always turned his brain into fog. This time, like many before, effort hadn't been enough. During lunch, Daniel sat alone near the edge of the courtyard. His usual table was crowded with laughter he knew was partly about him. Someone tossed a crumpled paper ball his way. He didn't react. Inside he was somewhere else, spiraling between shame and anger. He couldn't go home and tell his parents, not today. Not when they worked overtime just to keep him in a decent school district. They believed in him, and right now, that felt like the cruelest part. The final blow came during 6th period, when Principal Harris entered the classroom to announce the results of the school's academic awards. As he handed out certificates, he paused and said something meant as a joke. "And for those of you who think math doesn't matter, just ask Daniel Rivera." The class exploded into laughter. Daniel froze, cheeks burning. Mr. Harris smiled and moved on, unaware or uncaring of the humiliation he'd just cemented. That evening, Daniel sat on his bed with the lights off. His math test lay on the floor, untouched. He hadn't eaten dinner. His mom knocked softly but didn't come in. "It's okay," she said through the door. "You're not stupid." Her voice was gentle, but it didn't reach him, not really. All he could think about was how small he had felt under the fluorescent lights. The sound of 30 kids laughing, and his principal turning him into a punchline. He stayed up past midnight, staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine a future where this wasn't the defining story of his life. Every version felt impossible. All he could see was the smirk on the teacher's face, the pity in some eyes, and the sheer mockery in others. For the first time, Daniel questioned if he even belonged in that school. Maybe the system was right. Maybe he just wasn't built for this. But somewhere between anger and despair, something shifted. He opened his phone and typed into the search bar, "How to get better at math on your own." The results were overwhelming: videos, articles, forums, but he bookmarked a few and watched one quietly. The speaker was calm, confident, and said something strange. "If you failed, that means you tried. Failing without trying is quitting. Failing while trying is learning." Daniel didn't fully believe it, but he didn't turn it off either. Didn't sleep much that night. But when morning came, something inside him hadn't completely shattered. It had cracked, and through that crack, a tiny bit of light had entered. He didn't know it yet, but that would be the last time he ever felt like the joke in someone else's story. Summer arrived without celebration. While other students posted pictures of vacations, beach trips, and late-night parties, Daniel Rivera slipped into silence. He didn't answer texts. He ignored group chats. He left social media untouched. The first week he mostly slept. The second he stared at his ceiling, waiting for the heavy weight in his chest to go away. It didn't. Time slowed. The humiliation from school still echoed in his ears. Laughs, comments, and that one moment he wished he could erase. He stopped going outside. His friends eventually stopped calling. His parents gave him space, unsure if he needed comfort or solitude. They didn't pressure him, and Daniel appreciated that. But the quiet began to sting. His notebooks lay unopened on the desk. His backpack, still stuffed with the last week of school, sat untouched in the corner. Dust began to settle on his textbooks, but something else began to settle too, an ache in his chest that slowly turned to a low, steady burn. That it wasn't anger at anyone in particular. Not really. Not even at the kids who laughed, or the principal who humiliated him. Daniel was angry at the story itself. How easily people could write you off. How quickly they judged your intelligence based on numbers on a page. He wasn't looking for revenge. That idea felt small and childish. No, what grew inside him was the need to rewrite the ending. He didn't want to be the failure they remembered. He wanted to remember himself differently. One night, sometime after midnight, he searched online. "Why am I bad at math?" Dozens of articles came up. Some were scientific, some motivational, some useless. But one video caught his attention, an ex-teacher explaining how school systems teach math wrong. Daniel clicked it. The man talked clearly, like he was explaining things to someone who mattered. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't condescending. Daniel watched it 3 times. Then, for the first time in weeks, he picked up a pen. He began watching more videos, some from YouTube channels with millions of views, others with just a few hundred. Khan Academy became his new home. He followed strangers on Reddit who struggled just like him. He learned about alternative learning styles, visual, spatial, kinesthetic. He realized how little the classroom had been built for how his mind worked. Every night, he studied for an hour. Then 2, sometimes He forgot to check the clock and looked up to find the sun rising. At first, it was humiliating relearning middle school concepts he should have mastered years ago. Fractions, long division, basic algebra, but Daniel didn't stop. He printed worksheets, rewrote equations by hand, whispered concepts out loud to himself. He began to understand not just the what, but the why behind each step. When he got a problem wrong, he no longer felt stupid. He felt curious, like there was something underneath the mistake that he wanted to see more clearly. Slowly, the fog in his head began to lift. His thoughts became more organized. His patience grew. And most importantly, he began to trust his own brain. There were still moments of frustration, days where nothing clicked, where he felt like throwing it all away, but he didn't. Every time he wanted to quit, he remembered that classroom, that laughter, and instead of shrinking, he sat a little straighter in his chair. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. It wasn't for them. By the end of summer, Daniel wasn't a genius. He wasn't ahead of the curve, but he was no longer afraid of math. He could sit with it, fight through it, and come out the other side. More than that, he felt something new: control. For the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for someone else to teach him. He was teaching himself. And that quiet fire inside him, it hadn't gone out. It was still burning hotter now, steadier, not to prove anyone wrong, just to prove himself right. Senior year began with less noise than usual. Daniel walked through the hallways unnoticed, no longer part of any crowd. Over the summer, he had changed something in his posture, in the way he carried himself. Not louder, just more deliberate. When he met with his guidance counselor, Ms. Patel, he didn't ask for help. He presented a plan, an independent study. In math, one-on-one progress, self-paced with accountability. It wasn't a common request. She hesitated, then agreed. His classmates saw him during passing periods, but few approached. He was no longer the joke, just forgotten, a background figure. Daniel didn't mind. Every morning he arrived early, sometimes before the janitor finished unlocking the doors. In the library, they gave him a small table near the back. He brought his own whiteboard, his own markers, and a binder full of printouts. This wasn't about school anymore. It was about not walking away from the thing that once crushed him. At home, he transformed the corner of his bedroom into a tiny workspace. He built a desk from leftover wood in the garage. Nothing fancy, just wide enough for a lamp, a notebook, and his laptop. He kept it clean, almost sacred. Next to it, he taped a single sheet of paper on the wall. This doesn't have to be easy, just real. It became his motto. Every night, after dinner, he'd sit down, light on, headphones in, and pick up exactly where he left off the night before. He started keeping a journal, not to write feelings, but to track effort. Each entry had a date, a subject, a sentence or two about what he learned, and one line titled, "Why I Didn't Quit Today." Some days the answer was simple: because I'm tired of running. Other days it was darker: because I won't give them another reason to laugh. But most days the answer became quieter, more honest: because I want to know I can. The journal filled slowly, page by page. His independent study teacher, Mr. Laird, was skeptical at first. He'd seen motivated students burn out before, but Daniel was different. He didn't ask for shortcuts. He didn't complain. He came prepared. Week after week, his confidence grew, not in performance, but in persistence. When he hit a wall, he didn't panic. He broke it down. Mr. Laird began giving him more challenging material, and for the first time, Daniel started asking questions, not because he was lost, but because he was curious. There were no applause moments, no dramatic breakthroughs, just small wins. Solving a type of equation he'd failed before, remembering a formula without notes, teaching a confused freshman during lunch. These moments didn't go on social media. Nobody clapped for him. But inside, Daniel felt something rebuilt, quietly, strongly, and not just in math but in how he saw himself. The label of not good enough started peeling off, one silent success at a time. Outside school, his world stayed small. He wasn't dating, he wasn't partying, but he didn't feel like he was missing anything. Each solved problem gave him more than validation, it gave him ownership. The subject that once made him feel powerless now became his proving ground. And though he still doubted himself sometimes, especially on the hard days, the act of showing up had become more powerful than the fear of failing. As fall faded into winter, Daniel looked out his window one night, journal open, pen in hand. He'd just finished a long set of problems that once would have broken him. He wrote that day's entry slowly. Under "Why I Didn't Quit Today," he paused before writing, "Because this is who I am now." No audience, no teacher watching, just him and the quiet strength that comes when you stop asking for permission to grow. The breakthrough didn't come from a textbook. It came late one night while Daniel was doodling on his tablet. His mind was too tired for equations, so he let his hands move freely, drawing simple, bold designs with thick outlines and bright colors. He posted one on Reddit, not expecting much, but a stranger messaged him asking if they could buy it as a sticker. Confused but curious, Daniel Googled how to turn digital art into physical products. That night he signed up for Etsy. At first, he uploaded 3 designs. The store name was simple: Rivera Prints. He borrowed $20 from his cousin to buy some sticker paper and printed them using his old inkjet printer. Orders trickled in every few days, just enough to feel real. He'd package them by hand, write a small thank you note, and walk to the post office before school. The first time he made $50 in a week, he stared at the balance with disbelief. It felt like magic, like value something he made was being exchanged for money. As the orders increased, he started tracking his costs: ink, paper, envelopes, shipping. He scribbled numbers on a notepad at first, but quickly realized he needed to understand more. He watched YouTube videos on profit margins, searched how to calculate ROI, and learned the difference between revenue and income. Terms that once felt alien now had meaning. For the first time in his life, math wasn't a wallet, was a tool, and he was learning how to use it on his own terms. Week by week, he reinvested every dollar. He upgraded his printer. He bought better materials. His designs improved to simpler, cleaner, more appealing. He noticed trends. Minimalism sold better than cluttered designs. Pastel colors outperformed neon. He began taking notes, reading, analytics, experimenting with pricing. A spreadsheet replaced his scribbled notebook. By the end of the semester, Rivera Prince wasn't just a hobby, it was a functioning business. His room now had two sides: the study corner, where he solved equations, and the creative corner, where stickers came to life. There were nights he'd spend hours switching between both, solving a set of problems, then designing a new collection. Each discipline fueled the other. Business math started to make sense because it meant something. The numbers weren't abstract anymore. They were connected to paper, ink, time is time, and the value it carried. His parents noticed the packages but didn't ask many questions. When he gave his mom money for groceries one weekend, she looked at him like he'd grown 3 inches. Overnight. "Where's this from?" she asked softly. "Stickers," he answered. She laughed, not understanding fully, but proud anyway. Daniel didn't explain further. He didn't need to. For the first time, he wasn't just helping himself, he was helping them too. That meant more than any A on a test. The money wasn't huge yet, but it mattered. Enough to pay for books. Enough to stop skipping lunch. Enough to dream a little. He started planning for college again, not just as a formality, but as a path, a business degree, maybe even marketing. He still struggled with certain formulas, still had to reread word problems 3 times, but the fear was gone. In its place was momentum, the kind that doesn't come from grades, but from feeling like you're moving forward. He'd end his nights now with 2 things: a design exported from Photoshop, and a journal entry about what he learned that day, whether it was how to calculate break-even points or how certain fonts triggered better click-through rates. The boy who once failed math was now applying it daily, quietly, practically, creatively. He wasn't chasing numbers for approval, he was using them to build something real. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, but Daniel sat quietly in his seat, cap tilted slightly forward, eyes fixed on the stage. Names were being read in quick succession, accompanied by claps, cheers, and the occasional shout from proud families in the back rows. His fingers tapped against his thigh, not from nerves, but from the weight of everything it took to get here. No cords hung around his neck. No special mention was coming, but he had made it. That was enough. His name was called like any other, Daniel Rivera. No pause, no reaction. He stood, walked across the stage, shook hands with a stranger, and accepted a diploma that felt both light and impossibly heavy. From the crowd, his mother clapped gently, eyes glassy. His father stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder. They didn't scream or whistle. They just watched fully present, completely proud. Daniel met their gaze for a second and gave a quiet smile. Mr. Harris was on stage but didn't seem to recognize him. The man who once turned him into a punchline didn't even blink when Daniel passed by. There was a time when that would have cut deep. Now, it didn't matter. Daniel didn't need to be remembered by the man who never saw him to begin with. He'd stopped needing that kind of validation. He wasn't here to prove anything anymore, not to teachers, classmates, or administrators. He was here because he didn't give up. After the ceremony, families gathered in clusters for photos and hugs. Balloons floated, flashbulbs popped, and laughter echoed through the parking lot. Daniel stayed off to the side with his parents. They didn't need pictures to remember this day. They had lived every step of it with him, quietly cheering, silently, sacrificing, always hoping. His mom hugged him tight and whispered, "You did it." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was too tight to speak. While walking back toward the building, someone tapped his shoulder. It was Ms. Delgado, his freshman English teacher. She had once pulled him aside after class to tell him his writing had heart, even when his grammar didn't. She didn't say much now, just a nod, a small smile, and the words, "I knew you'd find your way." Then she was gone, blending back into the crowd. It was such a small moment, but it hit harder than anything else that day. By now, Rivera Prince had grown into a steady stream of orders, not enough to quit school, but enough to cover tuition at the local community college he'd been accepted into. The acceptance letter had come a month before graduation. He didn't cry when he opened it. He just took a deep breath, closed his laptop, and went back to designing. That's how it was now, no dramatic scenes, just motion. quiet, constant motion forward. Later that night, Daniel sat at his desk with the lights off. The graduation cap lay on the bed, tassels slightly frayed. He opened his journal and wrote the date. Under why I didn't quit today. He paused for a long time before writing, because every version of me who wanted to quit deserves to see this. He closed the journal, leaned back, and let out a long breath. The silence in the room felt different now, not empty, full. He wasn't the top of his class. He didn't make a speech. He wouldn't be remembered in the yearbook for anything special, but he had walked across that stage with something no one could see: a quiet, earned belief in himself. For Daniel Rivera, that was the loudest victory of all. College wasn't easier, just different. The classes were larger, the expectations higher, but Daniel no longer felt like he didn't belong. He majored in marketing with a focus on digital strategy. His professors noticed his questions were sharper, his projects more grounded in real data. Rivera prints had grown beyond stickers. He now sold minimalist planners, phone cases, and custom prints. It started as art, now it was a business, a real one, and that scared him more than failing ever had. His nights blurred into early mornings. He'd spend hours packaging orders, answering customer questions, editing product photos. Then he'd open his laptop and dive into lectures or group projects. He hired his first freelancer, a graphic designer from Argentina, to help scale production. They communicated entirely over email and shared folders. It felt surreal. Daniel, the guy who once couldn't understand interest rates, was now tracking international invoices and managing timelines. Sleep became a luxury. Some nights he got 4 hours, others none. His grades didn't slip, but his body did. Caffeine replaced breakfast. His journal gathered dust. He stopped drawing for pleasure. Friends invited him out, but he always had just one more thing. To finish it wasn't sustainable. He knew that, but something inside him refused to slow down, terrified that stopping even for a day would undo everything he'd worked for. Then came the crash. Not dramatic, just a quiet, invisible unraveling. He missed a shipping deadline. A customer left a bad review. He forgot an assignment. And one morning he stared at his screen, completely frozen. No panic, no tears, just ... nothing. He couldn't move. That same fog from high school returned, but this time it wasn't from math, it was from exhaustion. Daniel closed the laptop and sat in silence for hours. Something had to change. At the campus counseling center, he told a stranger the story he hadn't told anyone in full. The failing grade, the laughter, the business, the wait. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She just asked one question: what would happen if you let yourself rest? The thought terrified him. But slowly, they built a new structure, one rooted in balance. Scheduled breaks, screen-free hours, meals that didn't come in wrappers. Daniel relearned how to breathe. He brought the same logic he'd once used to decode algebra into his own life. Burnout was a problem, so he broke it down. Inputs, outputs, systems. What drained him, what filled him. He began tracking his energy like a budget. Sleep was no longer optional, it was investment. He reintroduced journaling. Not every day, but enough to stay grounded. Instead of working more hours, he worked smarter, delegated, automated, trusted others. Rivera Prince grew stronger, not despite the slowdown, but because of it. His audience appreciated the new focus on intentional design. He launched a series called Break Build, centered on growth through struggle. It sold out in 2 weeks. What began as a private war against burnout became part of his brand, resilience, without self-destruction. He shared bits of his story on social media, not for pity, but to remind people that discipline without compassion leads to collapse. Daniel still faced problems. Suppliers dropped orders. Algorithms changed. Finals stacked up. But now, instead of spiraling, he approached each issue the way he once feared math, one step at a time, with patience, curiosity, and logic. The boy who once stared at a failing grade in silence now stared down challenges with clarity. Not because they were easy, but because he finally believed he was built to solve them. By the time Daniel turned 24, Rivera Prince had evolved into a full lifestyle brand. What began with stickers now included planners, apparel, digital tools, and even classroom kits for teachers. He was no longer just an entrepreneur, he was a quiet figure of inspiration in the e-commerce world. His face appeared in podcasts, articles, and online panels. Still, Daniel kept a low profile. He didn't speak in buzzwords or wear luxury brands. He still wore the same black hoodie during interviews. The moment that changed everything came unexpectedly. One of his followers posted a tweet: "Kid once laughed at for failing math now runs a 6-figure business teaching others how to succeed. Stay mad." Attached was a clip of Daniel speaking on a podcast. The tweet went viral, millions of views overnight. Journalists reached out. Venture capital firms started calling. Most saw him as a brand to buy, a product to scale. But Daniel wasn't interested in being a mascot for someone else's idea of success. He rejected most of the offers. Money wasn't his metric anymore. Control was, meaning was. Still, one investor caught his attention, not because of the check, but because she had once dropped out of school herself. They talked for hours, not about margins or ad spend, but about purpose. Together they designed something that felt urgent and overdue, a mentorship platform for students who had been labeled as slow, unmotivated, or hopeless. Daniel called it Second Try. The platform wasn't flashy. No gamification, no fake motivation, just connection. Teens could match with mentors who had similar struggles, share their stories, get access to free resources, and ask questions without judgment. Daniel built it the way he wished someone had built something for him at 16, with honesty, patience, and belief. Within a month, hundreds signed up. Within 3, it passed 10,000 users. Most were students who had never asked for help until now. He traveled more now, not for vacations, but for workshops and speaking events. He hated the stage, but he showed up anyway. Not for applause, but for the kids who sat in the back of the room, arms crossed, pretending not to care but listening to every word. Daniel told them the truth about failure, about shame, about rebuilding. He didn't sell hope, he modeled it. And they saw in him someone who didn't just escape the system but stayed to fix what it had broken. His inbox overflowed with messages. Some came from teachers, others from parents, but most were from kids. "I thought I was dumb until I heard your story. Thank you for saying what no one else does. I finally passed algebra." Daniel read every single one, not out of pride, but out of responsibility. He saved some of them in a folder titled Hard Days, a reminder of why he started. For when burnout crept back in, despite the noise, he stayed close to his routine. Morning coffee, meditation, journaling. He still designed once a week, just for himself. The money was good now, better than he ever imagined, but he kept his life simple. No expensive car, no team of assistants. He answered emails himself. At night, he still worked from his small home office, surrounded by sticky notes, product mock-ups, and a framed photo of his family. Daniel knew this version of success wasn't the one most people expected. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with viral stunts or big ad campaigns, but it was real. And for every student who had ever been laughed at for being behind, for being different, for failing a test that supposedly defined their future, Daniel Rivera was living proof that you could start at the bottom and still build something that mattered. The invitation came in an unassuming envelope, stamped with a school crest he hadn't seen in years. A centennial celebration. They called it 100 years of history, achievement, and community. Among the many asks was a request for alumni donors. Daniel almost tossed the letter in the trash. Why would they want anything from him? The same place where he'd been laughed at, dismissed, forgotten. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the quiet fire still burning inside. He folded the letter carefully and set it aside. On the day of the event, Daniel chose a clean, simple suit, nothing flashy, but enough to show he cared. He drove a modest car, not the flashy kind some of his former classmates might expect from a successful entrepreneur. Walking through the familiar halls felt surreal. The lockers were the same, the walls faded, but the memories pressed in from every corner. He heard laughter and chatter around him but kept his gaze steady. He spoke little, answered questions politely, and blended into the crowd like a ghost from another life. No one recognized him at first. Teachers passed by, old classmates smiled politely, and the principal greeted him with a nod, unaware of his identity. That anonymity was both strange and comforting. Then came the moment his name was announced as the evening's biggest donor. The room fell silent, heads turned, phones raised. Even Mr. Harris's expression changed, his eyes widened, and he did a slow double take. The same man who once mocked him now stood dumbfounded, forced to confront a reality he hadn't expected. Daniel walked up to the stage, calm and composed. He shook hands, nodded at familiar faces, and took the microphone. His speech was brief, no bitterness, no boastful triumphs. "I failed math in this building. I was laughed at, doubted, forgotten, but I stayed. And today, I'm here not to rewrite the past, but to help write a better future for every kid who feels like giving up." The room stayed quiet, hanging on every word. Daniel's return was not a roar, but a quiet declaration. The story wasn't over yet. The spotlight found Daniel as he stepped onto the stage, the auditorium packed with faces both familiar and new. The principal's voice carried over the microphone. "Tonight, we honor Daniel Rivera, the largest donor in our school's history." The words hung in the air, thick with surprise and curiosity. A hush settled across the room. Cameras clicked, phones raised. Daniel's heart beat steady, but his hands remained calm. This was the moment years of quiet struggle had led to. He looked out at the crowd not with pride, but with purpose. His voice was clear, steady. "I once failed math in this building," he said simply, pausing to let the weight of those words settle. A few faces shifted uncomfortably. "You laughed." The memory of that laughter rippled through his mind, but he kept his gaze forward. "That moment changed me. It was painful, humbling, and it forced me to grow in ways I never expected." Anger surfaced in his tone, no bitterness or blame. Instead, there was honesty. "Today, I'm not here for applause," Daniel continued. "I'm here so no kid feels the way I did. so no student feels small or invisible because of a number on a test or a careless comment. I'm here because I believe every child deserves a chance to find their own path, one that isn't defined by failure or fear. The room grew silent, a shared stillness that seemed to stretch forever. Parents, teachers, students all felt the power of his words. Daniel's speech wasn't just about giving money. It was a quiet declaration of hope and resilience, a reminder that wounds can become roots for growth. He spoke for every kid who had been overlooked, every young person who had been told they weren't enough. He lowered the microphone gently and stepped back, letting the silence speak for him. A few people blinked back tears. Others whispered, softly, as if processing something they hadn't expected to hear. The principal nodded solemnly, and a teacher in the front row wiped a hand across her face. It was a moment that no one wanted to rush past. Daniel left the stage. A student approached him nervously, eyes bright. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm failing math right now, but you gave me hope." Daniel stood there a moment longer, the cool night air brushing against his skin like a quiet reminder of how far he'd come. The school's lights spilled softly onto the pavement, casting long shadows that seemed to reach back into his memories of late nights studying alone, of whispered laughter in hallways, of that crushing feeling of invisibility. Yet, here he was now, not as the boy who had failed, but as the man who refused to be defined by those failures. He felt a swell of gratitude, not just for the moment, but for every hardship that had shaped him. He pulled out his phone and saw a message from the student he had just spoken to. "Thank you for believing in me." The words were simple but powerful. Daniel realized this was more than mentorship or business success. It was about human connection, about standing beside someone when they feel like they're sinking. He thought back to all the times he had felt alone and how just a single person's belief could have made the difference. Now, he wanted to be that person for others. Walking slowly toward his car, Daniel's mind drifted to the future. The mentorship program was growing faster than he'd expected, and he had plans, big ones. Partnerships with schools, scholarships, workshops, and maybe even a non-profit. He wanted to build bridges where walls had been, to turn his story into a roadmap that others could follow, one marked by resilience, hope, and relentless grit. The fire inside him wasn't just about success anymore, it was about legacy. The quiet of the night gave him space to think about the parts of himself he had almost forgotten, the doubts that still crept in on difficult days, the fears of failure that never fully disappeared. But now, instead of fighting those feelings with shame, he embraced them as part of his humanity. They were reminders that growth wasn't linear, that strength often came wrapped in vulnerability, and that was okay. More than okay, it was necessary. As he reached his car, Daniel spotted a homeless man sitting nearby, wrapped in a blanket. The man's eyes caught his, and Daniel offered a small gesture of recognition, of shared struggle in different forms. He thought about how many lives intersected in the city, how stories of pain and hope intertwined invisibly. Every day, his journey was his own, but it was also connected to a larger tapestry of human experience, one he was only beginning to understand. Driving home, Daniel turned on the radio and heard a song about overcoming adversity. It felt like a soundtrack, written just for him, soft but unwavering. He smiled to himself, realizing that while the applause had been quiet tonight, the internal celebration was loud and lasting. Every moment of despair, every failure, every late night, it all led to this, and it wasn't the end. It was just a chapter. Later that night, back in his apartment, Daniel sat at his desk and opened his journal. He wrote slowly, thoughtfully, reflecting on the night's events and the journey ahead. Under the heading New Beginnings, he wrote, "I am not the sum of my failures, but the proof of persistence. Tonight I stand for every kid who feels invisible. This is our fight, our story, our future." The words felt heavy and light all at once, as if a weight had lifted. But a new responsibility had settled in. As he closed the journal and prepared for bed, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. The past no longer haunted him, it had shaped him. The future, uncertain as ever, felt full of possibility. He was no longer running from the boy who failed math in that old school building. He was running toward something greater, toward hope, toward purpose, toward a life defined not by mistakes but by what he chose to build from them. In the days that followed, Daniel found himself waking up earlier than usual, energized by a sense of purpose that had been dormant for years. The simple act of standing on that stage and speaking his truth unlocked something inside him, a desire to do more than just run a business. He wanted to build a community, to create spaces where struggling kids could see themselves not as failures, but as works in progress. The idea no longer felt like a distant dream, but a tangible mission. He reached out to educators and counselors he had met over the years, sharing his vision for expanding Second Try. Their enthusiasm surprised him. Many had witnessed firsthand the number of students slipping through the cracks, labeled and left behind. They saw in Daniel not just an entrepreneur, but a partner who understood the problem from both sides. Soon, plans for workshops and pilot programs began taking shape, fueled by shared passion rather than funding. But growth came with challenges. Managing a growing platform and his expanding product line tested his limits. There were late nights filled with technical glitches, frustrated clients, and endless emails. Occasionally, doubt crept in. Had he bitten off more than he could chew? Yet each time those thoughts arose, he returned to that quiet conversation with a student after graduation. It wasn't about him, it was about the faces he might never see but could still help. He made time to visit local schools, often speaking directly with students who reminded him of himself. Some were hesitant at first, shielding their pain with sarcasm or silence, but slowly, barriers broke down. Daniel shared his story not as a hero, but as someone who understood failure intimately. The raw honesty resonated. He watched as some students began to open up, sharing their own struggles and dreams. In those moments, the distance between teacher and student disappeared. Back home, his studio became a hub for brainstorming and creation, not just for products but for ideas on how to reach more kids. Friends from his community college days pitched in, helping with marketing, software, and outreach. The camaraderie brought fresh energy. Daniel learned to lean on others, recognizing that leadership was not about doing everything alone, but about trusting the team around him to carry the vision forward. Yet, amidst the progress, Daniel stayed grounded. He kept returning to his journal, writing through setbacks and successes alike. The journal was no longer just a record of perseverance, but a tool for clarity, a place to sift through emotions, strategize, and remind himself of the journey's meaning. He learned to celebrate small wins, understanding that true change was built on consistent, sometimes invisible effort. One afternoon, he received an unexpected email from a teacher who had once doubted him. She wrote that after hearing his speech, she had reconsidered how she treated struggling students. She thanked him for inspiring her to believe in the potential of every child. Daniel read the message twice, tears prickling his eyes. The circle was expanding, the ripple effect growing. Change wasn't just personal anymore, it was communal, spreading through classrooms and homes. As months turned into a year, Daniel's life settled into a rhythm that balanced ambition with mindfulness. He still faced pressures and fears, but they no longer controlled him. Instead, they became part of the process, a reminder that growth often comes wrapped in discomfort. And every time he felt overwhelmed, he thought back to that cool night outside the school, the students' hopeful eyes, and the promise he made to himself and others to keep trying no matter what.